But when my sister's military commander unexpectedly knocked on the door and said 6 words that changed everything, their faces went white as sheets. This is the story of how one moment turned family shame into complete vindication. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chen pulled his weathered Honda Civic into the familiar driveway of his childhood home in suburban Portland, Oregon. The modest 2-story house looked exactly the same as when he'd left 8 years ago. Same chipped blue paint, same crooked mailbox, same overgrown hedge that his father never quite got around to trimming properly. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 34, Marcus looked tired. His civilian clothes, a simple gray sweater and dark jeans, hung loosely on his lean frame. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of too many sleepless nights, though his family would never know the real reason why. 3 tours in classified operations across Eastern Europe had left their mark, but those stories weren't ones he could share around a dinner table. To them, he was just Marcus, the family disappointment who'd never found his direction. In his jacket pocket, Marcus carried a worn photo of his unit, 12 soldiers who had become his brothers and sisters. Only 7 of them had made it home. The weight of command, of life and death decisions, made in split seconds, had aged him beyond his years. He'd led operations that prevented international incidents, coordinated rescue missions behind enemy lines, and earned commendations that would never see the light of day. But to his family, he was just the quiet one, with the mysterious computer job who could never seem to get his life together. The smell of turkey and stuffing drifted from the house as Marcus sat in his car for a moment, gathering himself. Through the window, he could see his relatives already gathered in the living room. His successful businessman Uncle Robert was gesturing animatedly, probably telling another story about his latest real estate development that made the local news. His cousin Jennifer, fresh from making partner at her prestigious law firm, was showing off her new engagement ring to her doctor fiancé. His brother-in-law Steve was no doubt sharing updates from his cardiology practice and the awards he'd recently received. And then there was his sister Captain Sarah Chen, home on leave from her administrative position at Joint Base Lewis McChord. Sarah was the pride of the family, the military success story they loved to brag about to neighbors and friends. What they didn't know was that Sarah had spent most of her career behind a desk in supply management, handling logistics and paperwork. Honorable work, certainly, but a far cry from the classified operations that had defined Marcus's military career. The irony wasn't lost on him that his successful sister had never seen combat, while he'd spent years in situations that would give most people nightmares. Marcus checked his watch, 4:30 p.m. He was right on time for what his mother had called a special family Thanksgiving. The invitation had been warm but tinged with that familiar tone of disappointment he'd grown accustomed to over the years. "Maybe this year you'll have some good news to share," she'd said hopefully during their phone call, her voice carrying the unspoken question about when he might finally settle down and find a real career. He stepped out of his car, grabbed the bottle of wine he'd brought, a rare vintage he'd acquired during a mission in France, though he'd never be able to tell that story, and walked toward the front door. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sound of a football game from a neighbor's house. It was peaceful, wonderfully ordinary. So different from the high-stakes environments where he'd spent the last few years, where every decision could mean the difference between life and death for innocent civilians. Before he could knock, the door swung open. His mother, Patricia Chen, stood there with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Marcus, you made it. We were starting to worry you'd gotten lost again." The comment stung slightly, a reference to his tendency to arrive late to family gatherings, though she had no idea it was usually because he was returning from classified missions he couldn't discuss. "Hi, Mom." Marcus hugged her, noting how she seemed smaller than he remembered. "Sorry I'm a few minutes behind. Traffic was heavier than expected." "Well, come in. Everyone's here, and they're all eager to hear what you've been up to these days." Her tone carried that familiar mix of hope and skepticism, as if she expected to be disappointed but couldn't help wishing otherwise. As Marcus followed his mother into the house, he could hear the familiar soundtrack of family success, animated conversations about promotions, achievements and accomplishments that could be shared freely. It should have felt warm and welcoming, but instead, it felt like walking into a performance where he'd been cast as the underachiever. The living room was exactly as he remembered. Same floral couch where he'd sat as a child, same family photos on the mantle documenting everyone's milestones, same sense that he existed on the periphery of his own family's story. His relatives looked up as he entered, their smiles polite but carrying that undertone of pity he'd come to recognize. Marcus, his Uncle Robert, stood up, extending a firm handshake. "Good to see you, son. Still doing that computer thing in Sacramento." The way he said computer thing made it sound like Marcus was fixing laptops at a repair shop rather than coordinating international security operations. "Something like that," Marcus replied quietly, accepting the handshake. "Well, steady work, I suppose," Uncle Robert said, his tone making it clear he found nothing impressive about steady. "Not everyone can build a real estate empire like I have. Did I mention my latest development project made the front page of the business section?" Marcus nodded politely, used to these subtle comparisons. In his jacket pocket, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message, probably a check-in from his handler about a developing situation in Eastern Europe. Even on leave, the job never really stopped, but his family would never understand that the boring computer job was actually his cover for coordination work that helped prevent international crises. Sarah appeared from the kitchen, looking crisp in her dress uniform. She hugged him warmly, the one family member who seemed genuinely happy to see him, even if she didn't know the full truth about his service. "Hey, big brother. Glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it," Marcus said, meaning, despite everything, despite the constant feeling of being misunderstood, family still mattered to him. "Mom's been cooking all day," Sarah said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "And fair warning, everyone's been asking about your career prospects again." Uncle Robert's been particularly vocal about people who waste their potential, Marcus sighed internally. He'd hoped for one holiday without the familiar interrogation about his life choices, but he should have known better. To his family, success was measured in titles you could print on business cards, salaries you could brag about, and stories you could share at dinner parties. His real accomplishments, the terrorist plots disrupted, the hostages rescued, the international incidents averted, might as well not exist. Marcus, his cousin Jennifer, approached with the confident stride of someone whose achievements were very public and very impressive. "I was just telling everyone about making partner at the firm, youngest in the company's history. Can you believe it? What about you? Any exciting developments? Remind me again what exactly you do." The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Marcus felt the familiar weight of maintaining his cover story while watching his family's expectations diminish with each vague answer he'd given over the year. And so it began, another family gathering where he'd play the role of the disappointment, all while carrying secrets that would change everything if they only knew the truth. The dining room buzzed with the kind of animated conversation that only comes when successful people gather to celebrate their achievements. Marcus found himself seated between his teenage nephew Kyle and his father, William Chen, a retired professor who'd spent 40 years building a reputation in academic circles. The mahogany table groaned under the weight of his mother's elaborate Thanksgiving spread, but the real weight Marcus felt was the familiar pressure of family expectation. "So Marcus," his father began, cutting into his turkey with surgical precision, "your mother mentioned you might have some news to share this year. Perhaps you've finally decided to go back to school, get that MBA we discussed." Marcus took a careful sip of water, buying himself a moment. Around the table, conversations quieted slightly as family members tuned in, sensing the start of the annual "What's Wrong with Marcus" discussion. "I'm doing well with my current work, Dad. It's fulfilling." Uncle Robert let out a small chuckle from across the table. "Fulfilling doesn't pay the bills, son. At your age, I'd already started my second company, built it from nothing into a multi-million-dollar operation." He gestured with his fork toward the large window overlooking the neighborhood. "See that development across the street? I broke ground on that last month. Real tangible success, something you can point to and say, 'I built that.'" "That's wonderful, Uncle Robert," Marcus replied diplomatically, though he couldn't help thinking about the refugee camp he'd helped establish in Romania, or the infrastructure projects his team had coordinated in war-torn regions, buildings that housed families, not just generated profit. Jennifer leaned forward, her engagement ring catching the light from the chandelier. Marcus, have you considered consulting? With your computer background, you could probably make decent money helping small businesses with their IT issues. It's not glamorous. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The patronizing tone made Marcus's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He'd spent the last 3 months coordinating cybersecurity operations that prevented attacks on critical infrastructure, but to his family, he was apparently qualified to reset passwords and install antivirus software. Jennifer just landed the Morrison case, her fiancé David announced proudly. Biggest corporate merger in the state this year. The partners are already talking about fast-tracking her to senior partner. That's incredible, Jen, Sarah chimed in, raising her wine glass. Speaking of careers, I got word yesterday that I'm being considered for a promotion to major. Supply chain management has been expanding, and they need experienced officers to head the new logistics division. The table erupted in congratulations and Patricia Chen beamed as she looked around at her successful family. Sarah, that's wonderful news. Major Chen has such a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Marcus smiled genuinely for his sister, even as he felt the familiar sting of being the family's forgotten middle child. Sarah had worked hard for her promotion, and he was proud of her achievements, even if they paled in comparison to his own classified accomplishments. It's about time the military recognized talent, Uncle Robert declared, raising his glass. Sarah's been making smart moves, building the right connections. That's how you get ahead in any organization, visibility and networking. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. Leadership positions require strategic thinking and the ability to manage complex operations. Sarah's always had those qualities. His eyes drifted to Marcus with barely concealed disappointment. It's never too late to develop those skills, of course. Kyle, Marcus's 17-year-old nephew, looked up from his phone. Uncle Marcus, what exactly do you do all day, like specifically? The teenager's question was innocent enough, but it cut through the polite facade that had been masking the family's confusion about Marcus's career. The table fell silent. All eyes turned to Marcus, waiting for an answer that never seemed to satisfy anyone. He'd rehearsed variations of his cover story hundreds of times, but under the scrutiny of his entire family, the words felt hollow. I work in systems coordination, Marcus said carefully, making sure different networks communicate effectively, preventing system failures, that sort of thing. That sounds, Jennifer paused, clearly struggling to find something positive to say. Stable, Uncle Robert repeated, the word hanging in the air like a deflated balloon. At 34, stable isn't really the goal anymore, is it? You should be building something, creating value, making your mark on the world. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket, another encrypted message, probably an update on the situation developing in the Balkans, that his team was monitoring. He ignored it, knowing that even this small distraction would be noticed and criticized. I worry about you sometimes, Marcus, his mother said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of concern. You're so bright, so capable, but you seem afraid to take risks, afraid to really commit to something meaningful. The irony was suffocating. Marcus had taken risks that would give his mother nightmares. He'd committed to protecting people who would never know his name, never thank him for the sacrifices he'd made. But explaining any of that would require revealing classified information that could endanger ongoing operations. Maybe he's just not ambitious, Kyle said with teenage bluntness. Some people are okay being average. The comment hit harder than any of the subtle digs from the adult. To be called average by his own nephew, while carrying the weight of operations that had saved countless lives, felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Kyle, Sarah warned, but the damage was done. What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Kyle shrugged. All my friends' uncles have cool jobs. One's a surgeon, another runs a tech startup. When people ask what Uncle Marcus does, I don't even know what to tell them. Uncle Robert set down his wine glass with more force than necessary. The boy has a point. At some point you have to ask yourself what you're really contributing. Are you making the world better? Are you building something that matters? Or are you just existing? Marcus felt the familiar burn of frustration building in his chest. He'd spent years making the world safer, preventing conflicts that could have escalated into international crises. He'd built networks of cooperation between allies, coordinated operations that saved lives, and protected freedoms that his family took for granted every single day. But he couldn't say any of that, so he sat there, absorbing their disappointment, their pity, their genuine concern that he was wasting his life. The weight of his real achievements felt heavier than ever, precisely because he couldn't share them with the people who mattered most to him. "I think," Dr. Chen said with the measured tone of someone delivering a diagnosis, "it's time for some honest reflection about where your life is headed, son, before it's too late to make meaningful changes." The conversation continued around him, but Marcus felt increasingly isolated, surrounded by family, but completely alone with the truth of who he really was and what he'd accomplished. Little did they know that in just a few minutes, everything they thought they knew about him was about to change forever. The dining room had taken on the atmosphere of an intervention. Marcus could feel the weight of 8 pairs of eyes studying him with mixtures of concern, disappointment, and barely concealed frustration. His mother had cleared the dinner plates, but no one had moved to the living room for dessert. This conversation was far from over. "You know what I think the real problem is?" Uncle Robert continued, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd never been wrong about anything. "You've gotten comfortable with mediocrity. You've found a safe little job that doesn't challenge you, and now you're afraid to reach for something bigger." Dr. Chen nodded gravely. "Your uncle has a point, Marcus. Fear of failure often masquerades as contentment, but at 34 you can't afford to coast anymore. Life has a way of passing you by if you're not careful." Marcus's phone buzzed again in his pocket, the third encrypted message in the last hour. The situation in Eastern Europe was clearly escalating, and his team was probably wondering why their commanding officer wasn't responding. But here he sat, enduring lectures about ambition from people who had no idea that international security operations were unfolding in real time. "Maybe we're being too subtle," Jennifer interjected, her lawyer instincts taking over. "Marcus, we're worried about you. We love you, but we're watching you waste your potential, and it's painful. You're intelligent, you have a college degree, you come from a family of achievers. What's holding you back?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat. As the only other military member in the family, she felt caught between defending her brother and acknowledging their relatives' concerns. "I think Marcus is doing fine," she said diplomatically. "Not everyone needs to be a CEO or a doctor to have a meaningful life, but he could be so much more," Patricia Chen said, her voice heavy with maternal concern. When Marcus was in high school, his guidance counselor said he had leadership potential. His teachers saw something special in him. Where did that ambitious young man go? The irony was crushing. Marcus had exceeded every bit of that leadership potential, commanding elite units in some of the most challenging operations the military had ever undertaken. He'd led teams through situations that would break most people, made decisions under pressure that had literally changed the course of international relations, but his family saw only the quiet man who couldn't explain where he'd been for the last 8 years. "Leadership potential," Kyle snorted, looking up from his phone. "More like potential to lead a very boring life." "Sorry, Uncle Marcus, but when's the last time you did anything that actually mattered?" The question hung in the air like a physical blow. Marcus's hands resting on the table tightened almost imperceptibly. In the last 6 months alone, he'd coordinated the extraction of American civilians from a conflict zone, prevented a terrorist cell from acquiring weapons-grade materials, and established communication protocols that had stopped a border dispute from escalating into armed conflict. But Kyle was asking when he'd last done anything that mattered. "Kyle, that's enough," Sarah warned, but her nephew was just getting started. "No, seriously, I want to understand. All my friends talk about their family members who've done cool stuff. My friend Jake's uncle started a company that got bought by Google. Emma's aunt is a federal judge. Tyler's uncle is a Navy SEAL who's been on TV. What's Uncle Marcus's big accomplishment? He knows how to fix computers." Uncle Robert chuckled, but there was an edge to it. The boys got a point about accomplishments. "In business we measure success by results, revenue generated, jobs created, problems solved. What are your metrics, Marcus? How do you measure whether your work has value?" Marcus looked around the table at his family. "Successful, accomplished people who lived in a world where achievements could be quantified, celebrated, and they had no framework for understanding a life lived in shadows, where the greatest victories were the disasters that never happened, the conflicts that never escalated, the threats that never materialized. Maybe the problem is that you've never really been tested, Dr. N suggested, his academic mind searching for explanations. Some people need adversity to find their strength. Perhaps your life has been too comfortable, too safe. The comment about safety broke something inside Marcus. He'd spent 3 years in conditions that most people couldn't imagine, making life or death decisions while his family slept safely in their suburban beds. He'd been tested in ways that would shatter most people's understanding of what human beings could endure. You know what I think, Jennifer continued, her voice taking on the prosecutorial tone that had made her such a successful lawyer. I think Marcus is scared. Scared of competition, scared of failure, scared of trying something that might not work out. So he's chosen a path where he can't fail because he's never really trying. The accusation of cowardice hit harder than anything else they'd said. Marcus had faced enemy fire, led rescue operations behind hostile lines, and made decisions that required the kind of courage most people would never need to summon. But to his family, he was a coward hiding behind a safe job. Patricia Chen reached across the table and touched her son's hand gently. Sweetheart, we're not trying to hurt you. We just want to see you happy, fulfilled, making a difference in the world. Don't you want to do something that you can be proud of? Something that matters? The sincerity in his mother's voice was almost harder to bear than the criticism. She genuinely believed she was helping him, pushing him toward a better life. She had no idea that he went to sleep every night, knowing that his work had made the world safer for millions of people, including everyone sitting at this table. What if we helped you? Uncle Robert offered, his tone softening slightly. I have connections in the tech industry. I could make some calls, get you interviews at real companies, places where you could use your skills and actually advance your career. Or, Dr. Chen added, you could consider going back to school, get an advanced degree, specialize in something with real potential. It's not too late to change direction. Marcus felt the walls closing in. Every offer of help, every suggestion, every expression of concern felt like another weight added to the secret he carried. His phone buzzed again, the fourth message. Whatever was happening overseas was serious enough that his superiors were getting concerned about his silence. I just don't understand, Kyle said, shaking his head with teenage certainty. If I were 34 and had accomplished basically nothing, I'd be freaking out. Doesn't it bother you that you're just ordinary? The word ordinary echoed in Marcus's mind. Ordinary, after everything he'd done, everything he'd sacrificed, everything he'd achieved in service to his country. His own family saw him as ordinary. Kyle, Sarah said sharply, you need to stop. Why? Someone needs to say it. Kyle shot back. Uncle Marcus is wasting his life, and everyone's too polite to tell him the truth. He's 34 years old, and has nothing to show for it. Nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at his nephew, this 17-year-old boy who had never known real hardship, never faced genuine danger, never had to make decisions that affected anything more significant than his college applications, and felt something cold settle in his chest. Nothing to show for it. Nothing. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, to finally say something that might defend himself without revealing classified information. When the doorbell rang, the sound cut through the tension like a blade, and everyone at the table turned toward the front door with surprised confusion. They weren't expecting anyone else for dinner. Who could that be? Patricia Chen wondered aloud, rising from her chair. We're not expecting company. As footsteps approached the front door, Marcus felt his phone buzz once more. But this time, something in his gut told him that the timing of this interruption was about to change everything. Patricia Chen opened the front door to find a tall, imposing figure in military dress uniform, standing on her porch. Colonel James Harrison was everything Hollywood would cast as the perfect military commander. Silver hair, piercing blue eyes, chest full of ribbons and medals that spoke of decades of distinguished service. His presence commanded immediate respect, even from civilians who wouldn't recognize his rank insignia. Good evening, ma'am. I'm Colonel Harrison from Joint Base Lewis McChord. I apologize for the intrusion. But I'm looking for Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chen. I was told he might be here. Patricia's eyes widened in confusion. Lieutenant Colonel. I'm sorry, but I think there's been some mistake. My son Marcus works in computers. He's not military. Behind her, the dining room had gone completely silent. Marcus felt his blood run cold as he heard his real rank spoken aloud in his family's home. This was his worst nightmare, his two worlds colliding in the most public, most undeniable way possible. Ma'am, there's no mistake, Colonel Harrison said firmly but politely. I need to speak with Lieutenant Colonel Chen immediately regarding an urgent operational matter. May I come in? Sarah appeared behind her mother, still in her captain's uniform, her face a mask of confusion. I'm Captain Sarah Chen. Sir, I think there might be some confusion. My brother isn't military. I am. Colonel Harrison's eyes shifted to Sarah, and he rendered a crisp salute. Captain Chen, it's an honor. I've heard excellent things about your work in logistics. But I'm here for your brother. He paused, his expression growing more serious. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chen, Commanding Officer of Special Operations Task Force 7. The words hit the family like a physical blow. Sarah's face went white as she slowly returned the colonel's salute, her mind racing to process what she'd just heard. Behind her, she could hear chairs scraping against the floor as the rest of the family moved toward the front door. I'm sorry, Uncle Robert's voice came from the hallway, loud and skeptical, but there's obviously been some mix-up. Marcus isn't a lieutenant colonel. He's never even been in the military. He works with computers in Sacramento. Colonel Harrison turned his attention to the growing crowd of family members gathering behind Patricia. His expression remained professionally neutral, but there was a hint of steel in his voice when he spoke. Sir, I can assure you that Lieutenant Colonel Chen has been serving his country with extraordinary distinction for the past 8 years. He's currently on authorized leave, but we have a situation developing that requires his immediate attention. Marcus finally appeared in the doorway, and the colonel's demeanor immediately shifted to one of profound respect. Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but we have Code Yellow status on Operation Baltic Shield. The situation in Estonia has escalated, and the Joint Chiefs are requesting your assessment and recommendations within the hour. The family watched in stunned silence as Marcus straightened, his entire bearing transforming before their eyes. Gone was the quiet, unassuming man they'd been lecturing about wasted potential. In his place stood someone they'd never seen before, a military officer whose presence suddenly commanded the room. Marcus asked, his voice taking on a crisp, authoritative tone his family had never heard. None yet, sir, but the intelligence suggests we have a narrow window. Your contact in Tallinn is standing by for secure communication. Uncle Robert's mouth hung open as he watched this exchange. The man he'd been condescending to for the past hour was discussing international operations, with a full colonel who was treating him with obvious deference. Colonel Harrison, Marcus said formally, I'll need 20 minutes to secure transport and access to encrypted communication. Is the Situation Room at Lewis McCord prepared for a priority briefing? Yes, sir. I have a helicopter standing by. We can have you there in 15 minutes. Dr. Chen found his voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Marcus, Lieutenant Colonel, you outrank Sarah. Colonel Harrison turned to address the family directly, his tone carrying the weight of absolute authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I realize this is a shock, but Lieutenant Colonel Chen is one of the most decorated officers in special operations. He's coordinated multinational peacekeeping efforts, prevented international incidents, and saved countless lives through his leadership and strategic planning. Jennifer stepped forward, her lawyer instincts kicking in despite her obvious confusion. But he said he worked in computer, in Sacramento. We thought, ma'am, Colonel Harrison interrupted gently, Lieutenant Colonel Chen's work is highly classified. His cover identity is necessary for operational security. What I can tell you is that your son has received the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Bronze Stars and the Defense Superior Service Medal for his actions in classified operations. The colonel reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder marked with security classification. This morning, the president signed authorization for Lieutenant Colonel Chen to receive the Legion of Merit for his role in preventing what could have been a major international crisis. The ceremony is scheduled for next month at the Pentagon. Kyle, who had been calling his uncle ordinary just minutes before, stared in absolute shock. The president? Like, the actual president? Yes, son, the actual president, Colonel Harrison confirmed. Your uncle's work has briefed the National Security Council on multiple occasions. He's what we call a quiet professional, someone whose service to country often goes unrecognized because the nature of his work demands secrecy. Patricia Chen sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the revelation. All these years, when you said you couldn't talk about work. Mom, Marcus said softly, his voice gentling as he addressed his family. I wanted to tell you, every time you worried about my career, every time you thought I was wasting my potential, I wanted to explain, but my oath, my duty, required me to maintain operational security. Sarah was staring at her brother with a mixture of awe and newfound respect. Marcus, you outrank me by 2 grades. You're not just military, you're Special Operations Command level. Colonel Harrison nodded approvingly. Captain, your brother is considered one of the finest tactical minds of his generation. The operations he's planned and executed have quite literally changed the course of international relations in Eastern Europe. Uncle Robert, who had spent the evening lecturing Marcus about building something meaningful, cleared his throat awkwardly. The development project I was bragging about, the one that made the newspaper, is very impressive, Uncle Robert, Marcus said diplomatically. But yes, the operations I coordinate tend to focus on preventing wars rather than building shopping centers. The silence that followed was pregnant with the weight of years of misunderstanding. Kyle was the first to break it, his teenage voice small and ashamed. Uncle Marcus, I called you ordinary. I said you had nothing to show for your life. Marcus looked at his nephew with compassion rather than anger. Kyle, you couldn't have known, and in many ways, the best outcome of my work is that it remains invisible. If I've done my job correctly, the crises I've helped prevent never make the news because they never happen. Colonel Harrison checked his watch. Sir, I hate to interrupt this reunion, but the situation really is time-sensitive. Marcus nodded, then turned to his family. I have to go. Duty calls, literally. But when I get back, he paused, looking around at their shocked faces. When I get back, maybe we can have a different conversation about what it means to serve and what constitutes a meaningful life. As Marcus moved toward the door, his transformation complete, his family watched in stunned silence. The man they'd spent the evening pitying was about to helicopter to a military base to help prevent an international crisis. The last thing they heard before the door closed was Colonel Harrison's voice. Sir, the Joint Chiefs are standing by for your assessment. The situation in the Baltics could destabilize the entire region without proper intervention. And then they were gone, leaving behind a family who suddenly realized they'd never really known Marcus Chen at all. The sound of the helicopter's rotors faded into the distance, leaving the Chen family standing in their living room in complete, stunned silence. The Thanksgiving dinner that had begun with such familiar patterns of success and disappointment had ended with a revelation that shattered everything they thought they knew about one of their own. Patricia Chen was the first to move, sinking slowly onto the couch as if her legs could no longer support her. 8 years, she whispered, staring at the front door where her son had just left to prevent an international crisis. 8 years we've been worried about his career prospects, and he's been saving the world apparently, Dr. Chen finished, his academic mind struggling to process the complete inversion of everything he'd believed about his son. The professor who had spent his life analyzing and categorizing knowledge found himself confronting the limits of what he thought he understood about his own family. Uncle Robert collapsed into his favorite armchair, the same chair from which he'd been dispensing business advice just an hour earlier. I told him he needed to build something meaningful, he said, his voice hollow with embarrassment. I lectured him about making his mark on the world. We all did, Jennifer admitted, Her lawyer's confidence completely deflated. She pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. I'm Googling his unit. Special Operations Task Force 7. Oh my God. Her face went pale as she read. This is one of the most elite units in the military. Their operations are so classified that most of their missions won't be declassified for 50 years. Sarah had remained standing by the door, still in her dress uniform, staring at the space where her brother had been just moments before. He outranks me, she said quietly, almost to herself. All this time I thought I was the successful one in the military. I've been so proud of my captain's bars, my promotion to major. She laughed bitterly. He's been a lieutenant colonel in special operations. While I've been managing supply chains, he's been coordinating operations that brief the president. Kyle sat heavily on the stairs, his teenage certainty crumbling around him. I called him a failure, he said, his voice cracking with shame. I said he was ordinary. I said he had nothing to show for his life. Tears began to well up in his eyes. He must think I'm such an idiot. We all are idiots, Uncle Robert said bluntly, running his hands through his hair. I spent the entire evening talking about my little real estate developments while he's been preventing wars. Actually preventing wars. Patricia pulled out her phone with shaking hands and began scrolling through her contacts. I have to call him. I have to apologize. The things we said. Mom, Sarah said gently. He's probably in a secure briefing room by now, discussing how to prevent international conflict. I don't think this is the time for family phone calls. The weight of their words throughout the evening began to settle on each family member like a physical burden. Every criticism, every disappointed sigh, every suggestion that Marcus needed to find direction or build something meaningful now felt like a betrayal of the worst kind. The phone calls, Dr. Chen said suddenly, remembering. All through dinner his phone kept buzzing. We probably interrupted him receiving urgent military communications while we lectured him about ambition. Jennifer was still reading from her phone, her face growing paler with each discovery. According to this, Task Force 7 specializes in crisis intervention and international stabilization. They work directly with NATO allies, coordinate with intelligence agencies worldwide. She looked up at her family. The computer job in Sacramento was his cover story. He's been living a double life to protect operational security, and we made it harder, Patricia said, her voice thick with regret. Every family gathering, every phone call, asking when he'd find a real career. Every time we compared him to other family members, she buried her face in her hands. He's been carrying all of this alone. Uncle Robert stood up abruptly and began pacing. You know what kills me? The respect in that colonel's voice. Did you hear how he spoke to Marcus? Sir this, and sir that. That wasn't just military protocol. That was genuine deference to someone whose expertise and judgment he trusted completely. The president, Kyle said weakly, still struggling to process it all. Uncle Marcus is getting a medal from the president. While I've been complaining about chemistry homework, he's been, what did the colonel say, briefing the National Security Council? Sarah walked over to the mantel where family photos were displayed, graduations, promotions, awards, all the milestones they'd celebrated over the year. Look at all these pictures, she said sadly. My military academy graduation, my promotion ceremonies, Robert's business awards, Jennifer's law firm achievements, Dad's academic honors. She paused, scanning the collection. There's not a single picture representing Marcus's actual accomplishments, because we never knew they existed, because he couldn't tell us, Dr. Chen corrected gently. His oath of service required him to maintain his covenant. He sacrificed recognition, understanding, even family approval to protect the security of his operations. The room fell silent again as they contemplated the magnitude of Marcus's sacrifice. Not just the physical dangers he'd faced, but the emotional cost of being misunderstood by the people who should have known him best. I need to make this right, Patricia said firmly, wiping away tears. When he comes back, when this crisis is resolved, I need to apologize for every doubt, every worried phone call, every suggestion that he wasn't living up to his potential. We all do, Uncle Robert agreed, but how do you apologize for 8 years of being completely wrong about someone? Jennifer looked up from her phone again, I found something else. The Distinguished Service Cross that Colonel mentioned. It's the second highest military decoration for valor. It's only awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat." She paused, letting that sink in. "While we've been worried about his career prospects, he's been risking his life for his country." Kyle wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "Do you think he hates us? For not understanding? For making him feel bad about himself when he was actually this?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "You know what? I don't think Marcus has the capacity for that kind of resentment. Did you notice how he responded when you apologized? No anger. No 'I told you so,' just compassion. That's who he's always been. That's what makes this worse," Dr. Chen said quietly. "He never defended himself, never got angry at our lack of faith. He just absorbed our disappointment and kept serving his country anyway." Outside, they could hear normal suburban sounds returning, cars passing, dogs barking, the distant sound of a television from a neighbor's house. The world was continuing its regular rhythm, oblivious to the fact that somewhere in a secure military facility, their family member was helping prevent an international crisis. "The next family gathering is going to be very different," Uncle Robert said with a weak smile. "If he even wants to come," Patricia worried. "After tonight, after everything we said, he'll come," Sarah said with certainty, "because despite everything, despite our complete failure to understand or support him, he loves this family." That's what tonight showed me, not just that we were wrong about his career, but that we were wrong about his character. He's been protecting us, not just from military threats, but from the knowledge of how badly we've treated him. As the family began the slow process of cleaning up the dinner that had changed everything, each member was left to grapple with their own role in misunderstanding someone they loved. The man they'd spent years pitying for his lack of ambition was, at that very moment, using his expertise to help prevent international conflict. Tomorrow, the newspapers might carry a small story about successful diplomatic resolution of tensions in Eastern Europe, but they would never know that Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chen, the family disappointment, had played a crucial role in maintaining global peace. And perhaps, that's exactly how Marcus preferred it. 3 days after Thanksgiving, the Chen family was still reeling from the revelation that had turned their understanding of Marcus upside down. The local news had run a brief story about successful diplomatic efforts that had de-escalated tensions in the Baltic region, but there was no mention of the Oregon man who had played a crucial role in preventing what could have been an international crisis. Patricia Chen had barely slept since Thursday night. She found herself replaying every conversation, every family gathering, every disappointed phone call over the past 8 years. The weight of her misunderstanding felt crushing. On Saturday morning, she finally called the one person who might have answers, Colonel Harrison. "This is Patricia Chen, Marcus's mother. I hope you don't mind me calling the base." "Not at all, Mrs. Chen. I was actually hoping to hear from you. I imagine Thursday evening was quite a shock." Patricia's voice was thick with emotion. "Colonel, I need to understand. How long has Marcus been carrying this burden? How long has he been protecting us from our own ignorance?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Miss Chen, your son has been serving in special operations for 8 years. In that time, he's turned down 3 promotions that would have required him to take a more public role because he didn't want to compromise the cover story that protected both his operations and your family's safety." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. He turned down promotions. Yes, ma'am. Marcus could have been a full colonel by now, possibly even general rank, but he chose operational effectiveness over career advancement. He's what we call a quiet professional, someone who serves without seeking recognition or glory. Patricia sank into her kitchen chair, overwhelmed. "We made him feel like a failure, didn't we? All these years we made him feel like he wasn't good enough." "Miss Chen," Colonel Harrison said gently, "your son never spoke of feeling unappreciated. If anything, he often mentioned how much his family meant to him, how their stability and normalcy gave him something to fight for. He understood that his service required sacrifice, including the sacrifice of being misunderstood by the people he loved most." Meanwhile, crosstown Uncle Robert was having his own crisis of conscience. He'd spent the weekend researching military special operations, trying to understand the magnitude of what his nephew had accomplished. The more he learned, the more ashamed he became of his Thanksgiving night lecture about building something meaningful. He called his business partner Tom, who was a Vietnam veteran. "Tom, I need to ask you something. If someone served in special operations, what would that mean exactly?" "Special ops, Bob. Those are the elite of the elite, the guys who do the missions that regular military can't handle." "Why do you ask?" "My nephew, turns out he's been a lieutenant colonel in some classified unit, while I've been telling him he needs to get his act together." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Finally, Tom's voice came back, serious and respectful. "Bob, if your nephew is special operations, then he's probably done things and seen things that would give you nightmares. Those men carry burdens that most of us can't imagine, and they do it so that people like us can sleep safely in our beds." At her apartment, Jennifer was having a similar conversation with her colleague David, who specialized in military law. "You're telling me he's Task Force 7? David's voice was awed. "Jen, I've worked on cases involving that unit. I can't tell you specifics, but what I can say is that they're legends in the military justice community, the kind of operations they handle. Your cousin isn't just military, he's military royalty." "Military royalty," Jennifer repeated numbly. "And I offered to help him find a job in IT consulting." Sarah had requested a meeting with her commanding officer at Lewis McChord, Major General Williams. She needed to understand her brother's true position in the military hierarchy. "Captain Chen," the general said, reviewing a file on his desk, "your brother's classified record is remarkable. I can't share operational details, but I can tell you that Lieutenant Colonel Chen has been personally commended by 4 different defense secretaries and has briefed 3 presidents on international security matters." Sarah felt her world shift. "Sir, I've been so proud of my own service, my promotion to major, but he's been, Captain, there's no shame in logistics. The military runs on supply chains, and your work is vital, but your brother operates in a different sphere entirely. He's what we call a strategic asset, someone whose expertise and judgment are considered irreplaceable." The general leaned forward. "I'll tell you something that's not classified. Your brother was offered a position on the Joint Chiefs of Staff last year. He turned it down because it would have required him to give up field operations. He chose service over prestige." That evening, Kyle was in his room, staring at his computer screen. He'd been researching military awards, trying to understand what the medals Colonel Harrison had mentioned actually meant. The Distinguished Service Cross entry made him feel sick to his stomach. "Awarded for extraordinary heroism, not justifying the award of the Medal of Honor." He walked downstairs to find his parents and uncle gathered in the living room, all looking as shell-shocked as he felt. "Dad," he said quietly, "the Distinguished Service Cross is only given for extreme heroism in combat." "Uncle Marcus, he almost died for his country, didn't he?" Chen nodded grimly. "Multiple times, from what I've been reading, and we spent Thursday night questioning his life choices." The family sat in contemplative silence until Patricia's phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's number, and the room went dead quiet. "Hello, sweetheart," she answered, her voice carefully controlled. "Hi, Mom. I wanted to call and apologize for Thursday night. I know Colonel Harrison's visit was a shock, and I should have found a way to prepare you for the possibility that my cover might be blown." Patricia began to cry. "Marcus, honey, you don't need to apologize for anything. We're the ones who owe you an apology." 8 years of apologies. "Mom, you don't understand something," Marcus said gently. "The reason I could do my job, the reason I could handle the pressure and the danger, was because I knew I had a family who loved me waiting at home. Even when you worried about my career, even when you thought I was wasting my potential, you never stopped loving me. That gave me strength when I needed it most." Uncle Robert took the phone from his sister. "Marcus, it's Uncle Robert. I need to say something. I spent Thursday night lecturing you about building something meaningful while you were literally preventing international war. I've never been more wrong about anything in my life." "Uncle Robert," Marcus chuckled, "your real estate developments employ hundreds of people and provide homes for families. That is meaningful. We all serve in different ways." Kyle grabbed the phone next. "Uncle Marcus,
I called you ordinary. I said you had nothing to show for your life. I'm 17 and stupid, but that's no excuse. I'm sorry, Kyle, Marcus said warmly. You're not stupid. You're 17, which means you're supposed to question everything and everyone. Keep doing that, just maybe with a little more kindness. As the phone was passed around the room, each family member offering their apologies and receiving Marcus's characteristic grace in return, they began to understand something profound. The man they had misunderstood for 8 years was exactly who they thought he was: kind, humble, dedicated to service. They had simply failed to recognize that those very qualities had made him one of the most effective soldiers of his generation. When Patricia got the phone back, she asked the question they all needed answered. Marcus, will you come to Christmas dinner? After everything we said, after how badly we misunderstood you, will you still want to spend the holidays with us? Marcus's answer came without hesitation. Mom, there's nowhere else I'd rather be. Family is what I fight for. You're what I fight for. As they hung up the phone, the Chen family understood that they had been given a gift more precious than any medal or commendation: the chance to truly know and appreciate the hero who had been among them all along, and this time, they wouldn't waste.
2 weeks later, Marcus pulled into his family's driveway for Christmas Eve dinner. This time, however, the atmosphere was completely different. Through the living room window, he could see his family gathered around, but there was none of the casual confidence that had marked Thanksgiving. Instead, there was an air of nervous anticipation, as if they were preparing to meet someone important for the first time. Patricia Chen had spent the last 14 days researching everything she could about military service, special operations, and the sacrifices made by families of service members. She'd even joined an online support group for military families, where she learned about the unique challenges faced by those whose loved ones served in classified roles. The stories she read made her realize that Marcus had been protecting them from more than just operational security. He'd been shielding them from the constant worry that came with knowing the true dangers he faced. Uncle Robert had undergone his own transformation. The successful businessman who had spent years measuring worth through profit margins and public recognition now understood that some of the most important work in the world happened in shadows, without applause or acknowledgement. He'd quietly made a substantial donation to a veterans organization in Marcus's name, though he planned to never mention it. As Marcus approached the front door, it opened before he could knock. Kyle stood there, no longer the cocky teenager who had called his uncle ordinary. The past 2 weeks had been humbling for the 17-year-old, as he'd researched military history and begun to understand the weight of service. Uncle Marcus, Kyle said formally, then broke into a grin. I mean, I don't know the proper protocol for greeting a lieutenant colonel who's also my uncle. Marcus smiled and pulled his nephew into a warm hug. Uncle Marcus works just fine, Kyle. That's who I've always been to you, and that's who I want to keep being. The living room fell silent as Marcus entered. Sarah stood at attention briefly before catching herself and relaxing into a smile. Jennifer and her fiancé David stood respectfully, the lawyer having spent considerable time educating himself about military hierarchy. Chen rose from his chair with a dignity that spoke of newfound respect, while Patricia fought back tears that had been threatening since Thanksgiving. Before anyone says anything, Marcus began, noting the formal atmosphere. I need you all to understand something. I'm still the same person who used to steal cookies from Mom's kitchen and who helped Kyle with his science fair project last year. The uniform doesn't change who I am in this family. Uncle Robert stepped forward first. Marcus, I've been doing a lot of thinking since Thanksgiving. About success, about what really matters, about the assumptions I made. He paused, struggling with words that had never come easily to him. I spent 20 years building a business that employs maybe 200 people. You've spent 8 years in a job that has literally prevented war. The scale isn't even comparable. Uncle Robert, Marcus replied gently. Those 200 people have families, they have mortgages and dreams and kids who need college funds. What you built matters to them every single day. Don't diminish your own accomplishments because mine happen to be classified. Jennifer approached next, her legal mind having processed the full implications of what she'd learned. Marcus, I've been researching the operations that have been declassified from units like yours. The 1999 Kosovo crisis, the 2014 Ukraine situation, the Syrian chemical weapons removal. She paused, looking at him with new eyes. How many of those were you involved in? Marcus's expression grew serious. Jen, even with my cover blown to you all, there are things I can't discuss. What I can say is that the work we do is collaborative. No one person prevents wars or solves international crises. It's always a team effort. Dr. Chen, ever the professor, had prepared what amounted to a lecture. Son, I've spent my career studying leadership theory, analyzing what makes some individuals capable of extraordinary responsibility. I thought I understood the principles, but I failed to recognize them in my own son. His voice grew thick with emotion. The humility, the quiet confidence, the ability to carry burdens without complaint. I taught those concepts for 40 years but didn't see them when they were sitting at my dinner table. Kyle had been fidgeting nervously and finally burst out. Uncle Marcus, I've been reading about the Distinguished Service Cross. The citation said extraordinary heroism in the face of extreme danger. Did you? Kyle, Marcus said softly, sitting down to be at eye level with his nephew. Part of military service means accepting that sometimes you have to put yourself at risk to protect others. But I'm here. I'm safe. And I have no intention of leaving this family behind. Sarah had remained quietly professional until now, but finally approached her brother with tears in her eyes. Marcus, I've been so proud of my captain's bars. So excited about making major, but you've been serving at a level I never even dreamed of reaching, and you never once made me feel small or insignificant. Sarah, Marcus replied, taking his sister's hands. Your service matters just as much as mine. Supply chains win wars. Logistics save lives. Never forget that every soldier in the field depends on officers like you to keep them equipped and supplied. We serve in different ways, but we serve the same cause. Patricia had been watching this exchange with growing emotion. Finally, she couldn't contain herself any longer. Marcus, sweetheart, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. All these years when we worried about your career, when we suggested you weren't living up to your potential, when we compared you to other family members, did we hurt you? Did our lack of understanding make your job harder? Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. Mom, there were times when it was difficult. When I'd come home from operations where we'd prevented something terrible from happening, and you'd ask me when I was going to find a real job. It stung, but you know what got me through those moments. He looked around the room at his family. The knowledge that you worried about me because you loved me, that love, even when it came wrapped in misunderstanding, was what gave me strength to do the hard things. Uncle Robert shook his head in amazement. You used our ignorance as motivation. I used your love as motivation. Marcus corrected. The ignorance was just the packaging it came in. The room fell into a contemplative silence, broken finally by Kyle's voice. Uncle Marcus, can I ask you something? Are you going to keep doing this job? The dangerous stuff? Marcus smiled at his nephew's concern. Kyle, I serve at the pleasure of my country. As long as they need me and I'm capable of doing the job, I'll keep serving. But I promise you this, I'll be as careful as I can be, and I'll always come home when I can. Patricia wiped her eyes and stood up. Well then, we'd better make sure you have good family dinners to come home to. And Marcus, no more cover stories at family gatherings. We can handle the truth, even if it means sometimes I can't tell you where I'm going or when I'll be back. The family exchanged glances, and Uncle Robert spoke for all of them. Son, we spent 8 years worrying about the wrong things. From now on, we'll worry about the right things. Your safety, your happiness, and making sure you know how proud we are of the man you've become. As they moved toward the dining room for Christmas Eve dinner, Marcus felt a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying begin to lift from his shoulders. For the first time in 8 years, he could sit at his family's table as his complete, authentic self. The secret that had separated him from the people he loved most was finally gone, replaced by understanding, respect, and a deeper love than had existed before. The man who had spent years protecting his family from international threats had finally found protection from their well-meaning but painful misunderstanding. And perhaps most importantly, he'd shown them that true heroism wasn't about recognition or glory, it was about quiet service, enduring sacrifice, and the strength to carry burdens, so that others didn't have to. This Christmas dinner would be different from all the others. This time, when they went around the table sharing what they were grateful for, everyone would know exactly why they were grateful for Marcus Chen. 6 months after that transformative Christmas dinner, the impact of Marcus's revelation continued to reverberate through the Chen family in ways none of them had anticipated. What had begun as a shocking correction of their assumptions had evolved into a fundamental shift in how they viewed service, sacrifice, and what truly mattered in life. Patricia Chen had become an unexpected advocate for military families. After months of reading and learning about the unique challenges faced by those who serve in classified roles, she'd started volunteering at the Family Readiness Group at Joint Base Lewis McCoy. Her first-hand experience of being a military family member who didn't even know she was a military family member gave her a unique perspective that helped other families navigate the complexities of classified service. "Miss Chen," said Amanda Rodriguez, a young wife whose husband was deployed with an unnamed unit to an undisclosed location, "how do you handle not knowing where they are or what they're doing?" Patricia smiled gently, remembering her own years of worry about Marcus's computer job. "Honey, I spent 8 years not knowing what my son was really doing, and I made the mistake of assuming it wasn't important. Now I realize that not knowing the details doesn't mean you can't know the character of the person doing the work. Focus on who your husband is, not where he is." Uncle Robert had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. The businessman who had measured success in profit margins and public recognition had quietly shifted his company's focus toward projects that served the community. He'd started hiring veterans, offering them positions that utilized their leadership skills and discipline. His latest development project was a affordable housing complex specifically designed for military families. "You know, Tom," he told his Vietnam veteran business partner during a planning meeting, "I used to think success was about building something everyone could see. Now I realize the most important work often happens where no one's looking." Jennifer had taken her newfound understanding of service in a different direction. She'd started taking pro bono cases for veterans dealing with legal issues, particularly those involving benefits and disability claims. Her law firm initially resisted the non-billable hours, but Jennifer's passion and expertise in the area had begun attracting high-profile military-related cases that brought prestige and substantial fees. "Your Honor," Jennifer argued in federal court, representing a special operations veteran fighting for disability benefits, "my client's service record is largely classified, but the medical evidence is clear. We cannot penalize a veteran for our inability to access the details of how he was injured in service to our nation." Sarah's career had taken an unexpected turn as well. The revelation about her brother's true role in the military had sparked conversations with her own commanding officers about leveraging her family's unique perspective. She'd been selected to help develop new family communication protocols for special operations units, drawing on her experience of being both a military officer and the sibling of someone in classified service. "The key," Sarah explained to a group of family readiness coordinators, "is helping families understand that love and support don't require complete information. My brother served effectively for 8 years while maintaining operational security, but he couldn't have done it without knowing his family cared about him, even when we didn't understand what he was doing." Kyle had perhaps been affected most profound. The teenager who had called his uncle ordinary was now considering a military academy appointment after graduation. His research into Marcus's service had opened his eyes to forms of contribution and leadership he'd never considered. His essay for the Naval Academy application began, "I used to think heroism was loud and visible. My uncle taught me that the greatest heroes are often the ones whose names you'll never know." Dr. Chen had incorporated his newfound understanding into his academic work. The professor who had studied leadership theory for 4 decades was now writing a book about invisible leadership, the kind of influence that shapes outcomes without seeking credit. Marcus's story, carefully scrubbed of classified details, formed the foundation of his research into leaders who serve without recognition. But what about the leaders who shape history from the shadows? What about those whose greatest victories are the disasters that never happen, the conflicts that never escalate? How do we measure and understand that kind of impact? Marcus himself had received news that would again test his family's understanding. He'd been selected for promotion to full colonel and assignment to the Pentagon, where he would help coordinate international security policy at the highest level. The promotion came with increased visibility and the end of his field operations career. "It's bittersweet," Marcus confided to Sarah during one of their now regular coffee meetings. "I'll miss the operational work, the direct impact, but maybe it's time for me to serve in a different way." "Are you going to tell the family about the promotion?" Sarah asked. Marcus smiled. "No more secrets. Remember, Mom made me promise." When Marcus announced his promotion at the next family dinner, the response was markedly different from previous celebrations of family achievement. Instead of surprise or celebration, there was a quiet pride mixed with concern. "Will this be safer?" Patricia asked, the question that had been on her mind since she'd learned the true nature of his previous work. "Much safer, Mom. The biggest danger I'll face at the Pentagon is probably getting lost in the corridors." Uncle Robert raised his glass. "To Colonel Marcus Chen, finally a family achievement we can brag about at dinner parties." The room erupted in laughter, but Marcus shook his head. "Actually, Uncle Robert, I'd prefer if you didn't. The best compliment you can give me is to keep treating me like the same Marcus who used to help Kyle with homework and steal Mom's cookie." Kyle, now a senior and preparing for his own military academy appointment, looked at his uncle with mature eyes. "Uncle Marcus, I've been thinking about something. All these months, we've been talking about how we misunderstood you, but I think we missed something important. You didn't serve all those years for recognition or understanding. You served because it was right. That's what I want to learn how to do." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Kyle, the fact that you understand that puts you ahead of where I was at your age. Just remember, service comes in many forms. Whether you serve in the military, like Uncle Robert serves his community through his business, like Jennifer serves justice through her law practice, or like your grandfather serves knowledge through his teaching, what matters is that you serve something bigger than yourself." As the evening wound down, Patricia pulled Marcus aside. "Sweetheart, I have something to tell you. All these months of volunteering with military families, learning about what you and others like you do, I finally understand what you meant when you said our love gave you strength. Because now, knowing what you really do, knowing the dangers you've faced and the responsibilities you've carried, my love for you has grown in ways I didn't think possible." Marcus hugged his mother tightly. "Mom, that's all any of us in uniform really want, to know that the people we love understand that what we do for them." As Marcus drove home that night, he reflected on the unexpected journey his family had taken. The revelation that had started with embarrassment and shock had evolved into something deeper, a family that not only understood his service, but had been inspired to examine their own ways of contributing to something greater than themselves. The man who had spent 8 years protecting his family from the knowledge of his dangerous work had inadvertently taught them that true fulfillment came not from recognition or understanding, but from service itself. And perhaps that was the greatest gift of all, not just being known for who he was, but inspiring others to become who they were meant to be. In the end, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chen had won something more valuable than any medal or commendation, a family that understood not just what he did, but why he did it. And in understanding him, they had discovered their own capacity for service, sacrifice, and love that asked for nothing in return. The quiet professional had finally found his voice, not through words, but through the example of a life lived in service to others. And that voice would echo through his family for generations to come. 1 year later, the Pentagon Ceremony Hall buzzed with quiet anticipation, as military families, dignitaries, and fellow officers gathered for the Medal of Honor Society's annual recognition dinner. Colonel Marcus Chen sat at the head table, still somewhat uncomfortable with the formal recognition, but understanding that sometimes public acknowledgement served a purpose beyond personal validation. The evening was particularly significant because, for the first time in his military career, Marcus's entire family was present to witness him receive public recognition for his service. The president had declassified several of Marcus's operations from 5 years prior,
allowing him to finally share some of his experiences with those who mattered most to him. Patricia Chen sat in the front row, wearing a small gold star pin that identified her as the mother of a decorated service member. The woman who had once worried about her son's lack of ambition now served on the board of directors for the Special Operations Family Foundation, helping other military families navigate the unique challenges of classified service. Ladies and gentlemen, the ceremony announcer's voice carried across the hall. Tonight we honor Colonel Marcus Chen, whose leadership of Operation Silent Shield prevented what intelligence analysts believe could have escalated into the first direct military conflict between NATO allies in over 70 years. Uncle Robert leaned forward in his seat, still amazed by the magnitude of what his nephew had accomplished. The businessman who had once lectured Marcus about building something meaningful had recently been featured in Military Family Business magazine for his veteran hiring initiatives and community-focused development projects. The operation, the announcer continued, required 18 months of coordination between 7 different nations, the establishment of diplomatic channels that had never existed before, and the kind of strategic thinking that prevented an international crisis from escalating into armed conflict. Jennifer dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, remembering her own patronizing offer to help Marcus find real work in IT consulting. She'd just been named Partner of the Year at her law firm, largely due to her groundbreaking work in military legal advocacy. Her most recent case had resulted in a landmark ruling that protected the benefits of veterans whose service records remained classified. Sarah, now a major herself and serving as the Pentagon's liaison for Special Operations Family Affairs, felt a surge of pride mixed with humility. Her work developing new support systems for families of classified service members had been directly inspired by her own family's journey from misunderstanding to advocacy. Kyle, sharp and confident in his Naval Academy dress uniform, watched his uncle with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what kind of leader he hoped to become. The teenager who had once called Marcus ordinary was now ranked 3rd in his class at the academy and had been selected for the summer leadership program with the SEAL. Colonel Chen's approach to international crisis management, the speaker continued, has become the template for peaceful resolution of conflicts involving multiple sovereign nations. His methods are now taught at the National Defense University, and have been adopted by NATO as standard protocol for preventing escalation in disputed territory. Chen, now Professor Emeritus after early retirement to focus on his research, had brought an advance copy of his newly published book, The Invisible Hand: Leadership Without Recognition in Military and Civilian Life. Marcus's story, carefully vetted by military censors, formed the central case study of how effective leaders often work behind the scenes to shape history. As Marcus approached the podium to accept his recognition, he paused to scan the audience. In addition to his family, he could see Colonel Harrison, now a brigadier general, and dozens of other officers whose own quiet service rarely received public acknowledgement. But what struck him most was seeing former members of his own units, men and women who had served under his command and were now leaders themselves. When I began my military career, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, I thought leadership meant making the tough decisions in critical moments. What I learned through 8 years of classified service is that the most important leadership often happens in the quiet moments, in the relationships you build, the trust you establish, and the example you set when no one is watching. He paused, his eyes finding his family in the audience. I also learned that service requires sacrifice, not just from those who wear the uniform, but from their families who love them without always understanding what they do or why they do it. Tonight I want to recognize my family, who spent 8 years supporting a son, brother and uncle whose work they couldn't understand, but whose character they never stopped believing in. The audience erupted in sustained applause as Marcus's family stood, not for recognition, but out of respect for the moment and what it represents. The operations we're honoring tonight were successful not because of any single person's heroics, but because of teams of professionals who understood that sometimes the greatest victory is the conflict that never happened. In special operations we have a saying, the best missions are the ones no one ever hears about. Tonight is unusual because you're hearing about one of them. Marcus looked directly at Kyle as he continued. To the young people in the audience considering military service, I want you to understand something important. The uniform, doesn't make you a hero. Character makes you a hero. Service makes you a hero. The willingness to put something greater than yourself first makes you a hero. The uniform is just what you wear while you're doing the work. After the ceremony, as the family gathered for photos and conversations with other attendees, Kyle approached his uncle with a question that had been weighing on his mind. Uncle Marcus, knowing what you know now, about the cost and the sacrifice and the years of being misunderstood, would you choose military service again? Marcus didn't hesitate. Kyle, every single day. Not because of nights like tonight, not because of the recognition, or the medals or the ceremony. I'd choose it again because somewhere tonight, there are families sleeping safely in their beds, who will never know that their security was purchased by people they'll never meet, doing jobs they'll never hear about, making sacrifices they'll never understand. That's enough for me. Patricia approached and took her son's arm. I have something to tell you, she said quietly. Last week, I got a call from a military wife, whose husband is deployed with a unit we can't talk about, to a place she can't know about, doing work that's classified. She was struggling with the isolation and the uncertainty. I spent 2 hours on the phone with her, sharing what I've learned about loving someone whose service requires secrecy. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. After we hung up, she called back to thank me. She said, Miss Chen, you helped me understand that not knowing what my husband does doesn't mean I can't be proud of who he is. That's when I realized that your 8 years of classified service didn't just train you to be a leader, they trained our whole family to serve. As they walked out of the ceremony hall together, Marcus realized that the recognition he'd received that night was meaningful, not because it validated his own service, but because it represented something large. It represented a nation's acknowledgement of all the quiet professionals who serve without recognition, and it represented a family's journey from misunderstanding to advocacy. The man who had spent his career working in shadows had finally stepped into the light, not for his own benefit, but to shine that light on others who continued to serve in silence. And perhaps that was the most fitting recognition of all. Not personal glory, but the opportunity to honor the countless others who would never receive public acknowledgement for their service.
3 months after the Pentagon ceremony, the Chen family had settled into a new rhythm of openness and understanding. Marcus's promotion to colonel had brought him to Washington, D.C., where he worked in the secure corridors of the Pentagon, but he made it a point to return to Portland regularly for family dinners that had taken on an entirely new meaning. It was during one of these visits, on a quiet Sunday afternoon in March, that Patricia Chen answered a knock at the front door to find a woman in her 60s standing on the porch. She was elegantly dressed, with silver hair and eyes that carried the weight of someone who had seen both great joy and profound loss. "Mrs. Chen?" the woman asked, her voice carrying a slight Eastern European accent. "My name is Elena Petrov. I believe your son saved my family's life." Patricia felt her heart skip a beat. Even now, months after learning the truth about Marcus's service, unexpected visitors still made her nervous. "I'm sorry, I think there might be some mistake. My son works at the Pentagon now, in policy coordination." Elena smiled gently. "Chen, 5 years ago, your son led an operation that prevented a border conflict between my country and our neighbors from escalating into war. My husband was a diplomat caught in the crossfire when extremists took hostages at a peace summit in Thailand. Colonel Chen, he was lieutenant colonel then, coordinated the rescue that brought 37 diplomats and civilians home safely." Patricia's hands trembled as she opened the door wider. "Please, come in. Marcus is here visiting. I think you should meet him." In the living room, Marcus was helping Kyle with his Naval Academy coursework while Sarah reviewed briefing documents on her laptop. The casual family scene was interrupted when Patricia appeared with Elena, her face pale with the weight of another revelation about her son's hidden service. "Marcus," Patricia said quietly, "this is Elena Petrov. She says you saved her family." Marcus looked up and immediately recognized the woman, though she had aged considerably since the photographs in her husband's diplomatic file. He stood slowly, his expression shifting to one of profound respect. "Mrs. Petrov," he said formally, "it's an honor to meet you. How is Ambassador Petrov?" Elena's eyes filled with tears. "He passed away 2 years ago, Colonel," But he lived long enough to see our daughter graduate from university, to walk her down the aisle at her wedding, to hold his first grandchild. She paused, struggling with emotion. None of that would have been possible without you. The room had gone completely silent. Kyle looked between his uncle and this elegant stranger, trying to process yet another layer of Marcus's hidden life. Sarah had closed her laptop, recognizing the gravity of the moment. "Mrs. Petrov," Marcus said gently, "I was just part of a larger team. The rescue operation involved multiple agencies, international cooperation." "Colonel Chen," Elena interrupted, her voice firm despite her tears. "I have spent the last 5 years trying to find you. My husband told me, before he died, that there was an American officer who had refused to follow the initial rescue plan because it would have resulted in civilian casualties. He said this officer designed a new approach that saved everyone, including 3 children who were in the building." Patricia sank into her chair, overwhelmed by this new understanding of what her son had faced. "Children?" she whispered. Elena nodded. The terrorists had taken hostages from a nearby school, children who were visiting the summit as part of an educational program. The original rescue plan would have saved the diplomats but not the children. "My husband said your son refused to accept that compromise." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, remembering the heated arguments in the command center that day. "Every life had value, Mrs. Petrov. We found a way to save everyone, or we didn't proceed. That was the only acceptable outcome. 3 of those children are now in university," Elena continued. "One is studying medicine, one is studying engineering, and one, my own granddaughter Anna, is studying international relations, because she wants to prevent conflicts like the one that nearly took her life." Kyle, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally found his voice. "Uncle Marcus, you saved children?" "We saved children, Kyle. It wasn't just me, it was a team of professionals who believed that no one was expendable." Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a worn envelope. "Colonel, I have carried this letter for 5 years, hoping to one day give it to you personally. It's from the children you saved, written on the anniversary of their rescue. They wanted to thank the American soldier who wouldn't give up on them." Marcus accepted the envelope with hands that weren't quite steady. As he opened it, dozens of photographs and handwritten notes in various languages spilled out. Pictures of graduations, weddings, new babies, family gatherings. Moments that existed because of decisions made in a crisis room half a decade ago. One note, written in careful English, caught his attention. "Dear American Colonel, I am Anna, age 12 when you saved me. Now I am 17, and will study peacemaking at university. My grandfather says, you taught him that some people will fight for strangers like they are family. I want to learn to be like that too. Thank you for my life. Anna Petrov." Sarah leaned over to read the note, and her voice was thick with emotion when she spoke. "Marcus, you inspired the next generation of peacemakers." Elena stood and approached Marcus with the formality of someone delivering an official message. "Colonel Chen, I have one more thing to share with you. Last month, the European Union established the Chen Protocol for Hostage Rescue Operation. It's named after you, and it mandates that no rescue operation can proceed if it doesn't account for the safety of all civilians, regardless of their nationality or status." Uncle Robert, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway, stepped forward. "They named a protocol after you. The Chen Protocol has already been used in 3 different operations across Europe," Elena explained. "Your approach to crisis resolution, the refusal to accept casualties as inevitable, the insistence on solutions that protect everyone, is now the standard for international rescue operations. Marcus, you've influenced international policy. Your ethical framework is literally being taught to military and diplomatic personnel across multiple nations." Marcus looked around at his family, then back at Elena. "Miss Petrov, I'm honored by the recognition, but I need you to understand something. The principles behind what you're calling the Chen Protocol aren't mine alone. They're the values this family taught me growing up. That every person matters, that you don't give up on people, that you find a way to do what's right, even when it's difficult." Elena smiled through her tears. "Then perhaps it should be called the Chen Family Protocol." Kyle stood up, his young face serious with newfound understanding. "Uncle Marcus, Mrs. Petrov, I think I'm beginning to understand something. about service that I didn't get before. It's not just about being brave or strong or smart. It's about caring enough about people you've never met to refuse to accept that they can't be saved. That's exactly right, Kyle, Elena said, turning to the young midshipman. Your uncle taught my family that heroism isn't about accepting losses. It's about refusing to accept them. As the afternoon continued, Elena shared more stories about the lives that had been saved, the families that had been preserved, the children who now had futures because of decisions made in a moment of crisis. Each story added another layer to the family's understanding of Marcus's service, but more importantly, it added to their understanding of the values that had guided that service. When Elena finally prepared to leave, she turned to Patricia with a final message. Miss Anne, I want you to know that your son didn't just save our lives that day, he saved our faith in humanity. In a world where it's easy to believe that people only care about their own, Marcus proved that some people will risk everything for strangers. That's a gift that goes far beyond military service. As they watched Elena drive away, the Chen family stood together on the porch, once again confronting the magnitude of Marcus's hidden impact on the world. But this time, they also understood that his heroism was rooted in the values they had all shared as a family. Values that they were now inspired to live out in their own way. The man they had once worried was wasting his potential had not only fulfilled that potential in ways they never imagined, but had also shown them that their own family values, when lived out consistently, could change the world one life at a time. 2 weeks after Elena Petrov's unexpected visit, Marcus received a call that would bring his journey of service full circle in a way he never could have anticipated. Admiral Rebecca Torres, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, personally requested his presence in her office for what she described as a conversation about the future of American military leadership. Colonel Chen, Admiral Torres began as Marcus sat across from her desk in the Pentagon's most secure briefing room. Your career has been remarkable not just for what you've accomplished, but for how you've accomplished it. The Chen Protocol, the diplomatic frameworks you've established, the international relationships you've built, they represent a new model of military leadership. Marcus maintained his characteristic humility. Admiral, I've been fortunate to work with exceptional teams, and to serve during times when creative solutions were needed. Colonel, I'm not talking about fortune or circumcision, I'm talking about a fundamental approach to leadership that prioritizes preservation of life over traditional military objectives. Your methods have prevented more conflicts than they've resolved, and that's exactly the kind of thinking we need as we face an increasingly complex global security environment. The Admiral stood and moved to a secure display screen. What I'm about to show you is classified at the highest levels. Your operations over the past 8 years have been monitored not just by your immediate superiors, but by an international consortium of military and diplomatic leaders who have been developing new approaches to global security. The screen displayed a world map with dozens of markers indicating locations where Marcus's influence had prevented conflicts, established diplomatic channels, or created frameworks for peaceful resolution of dispute. Marcus, the Admiral said using his first name for the first time, you've been selected to lead the International Crisis Prevention Initiative, a joint operation between NATO allies and key strategic partners. It's a new kind of military leadership position, one that focuses on preventing wars rather than winning them. Marcus studied the map, seeing for the first time the full scope of how his individual operations had connected to form a global network of stability. Admiral, I'm honored by the consideration, but I need to understand something. Would this position require me to give up field operations entirely? Actually, Colonel, it would require something more challenging. You'd need to train the next generation of officers to think the way you think, to approach international crises with the same ethical framework that has made your operations so successful. You'd be building an entire cadre of leaders who prioritize human life over political objectives. Before Marcus could respond, his secure phone buzzed with an urgent message. After checking it quickly, his expression changed to one of focused attention. Admiral, I need to brief you on a developing situation. We have intelligence indicating a potential hostage situation at the International Peace Summit in Geneva. Initial reports suggest a coordinated attack on multiple diplomatic venues. Admiral Torres immediately activated the Situation Room protocol. Within minutes, they were joined by intelligence officers,
diplomatic liaisons, and operational commanders from multiple allied nations. Colonel Chen, the admiral announced to the assembled team, will be coordinating our response to this crisis. I want everyone to understand that Colonel Chen's approach to hostage rescue has become the international standard, and his authority in this situation is absolute. As Marcus took command of the Situation Room, his family was gathering for their regular Sunday dinner in Portland, unaware that their son and brother was once again stepping into the role that had defined his career. Kyle, now in his final semester at the Naval Academy, was sharing updates about his upcoming graduation when Sarah's secure phone rang. As a Pentagon liaison, she often received updates on developing situations. "Excuse me," Sarah said, stepping away to take the call. When she returned, her face was serious. "There's a situation developing in Geneva, multiple hostage scenarios at the peace summit." Patricia felt the familiar knot of worry that had become her constant companion since learning the truth about Marcus's service. "Is Marcus involved?" "Mom, if there's an international hostage situation, Marcus is probably coordinating the response." Dr. Chen, who had spent the last year studying crisis leadership, understood the implications immediately. If this is the kind of complex multinational situation Marcus specializes in, the lives of dozens of diplomats could depend on decisions being made right now. Uncle Robert, who had learned to appreciate the weight of Marcus's responsibilities, shook his head. "And we used to worry about him having a stable career." Meanwhile, in Geneva, the situation was unfolding exactly as Marcus's experience had taught him to expect. Multiple terrorist cells had coordinated attacks on 3 different venues, where peace negotiations were taking place. Hostages included diplomats from 17 nations, as well as journalists and support staff. Colonel reported Captain Sarah Mitchell, the intelligence liaison, "We have confirmed hostages at the main summit building, the media center, and the diplomatic residence hall." Estimated total 87 individuals, including 12 children who were part of a youth peace program. Marcus studied the tactical displays, his mind automatically applying the principles that had guided every operation of his career. "What's the current rescue proposal from local authorities?" "Sir, Swiss Special Forces recommend a coordinated assault on all 3 locations simultaneously. They estimate acceptable losses at 15 to 20% of hostages." The room fell silent. Everyone present understood that acceptable losses in military terminology meant that 12 to 17 innocent people would die in the rescue attempt. Marcus stood quietly for a moment, thinking of Elena Petrov's words, of the children who had grown up to become peacemakers because someone had refused to accept their deaths as inevitable. He thought of his family, sitting around their dinner table, trusting that their values of protecting every life would guide his decisions. "That proposal is not acceptable," Marcus said firmly. "We will not proceed with any operation that treats human lives as acceptable loss. I need our best tactical minds working on scenarios that bring everyone home alive." Admiral Torres, watching from the command center, smiled with satisfaction. This was exactly why Marcus had been selected for the new international leadership position. His refusal to accept civilian casualties wasn't just humanitarian idealism, it was strategic brilliance that had proven successful time and again. Colonel reported Major James Rodriguez, the tactical coordinator. "The terrorists are demanding the release of political prisoners and threatening to execute hostages if their demands aren't met within 6 hours. Then we have 6 hours to find a solution that saves everyone," Marcus replied. "I want teams working on multiple approaches simultaneously: diplomatic engagement, tactical infiltration, and psychological operations, and I want all scenarios tested for 0 casualty outcome." Back in Portland, the Chen family had turned on the international news, where reporters were beginning to cover the developing crisis in Geneva. The coverage was still preliminary, but Patricia's motherly instincts told her that Marcus was in the middle of whatever was happening. "Do you think he's there?" she asked Sarah quietly. "Mom, if there are lives to be saved, Marcus is exactly where he needs to be." Kyle, whose understanding of military service had been fundamentally shaped by learning about his uncle's true role, spoke with mature certainty. "Uncle Marcus won't let anyone die if he can help it. That's who he is." As the evening progressed, 2 parallel dramas unfolded, one in a secure situation room, where Marcus coordinated an international response to save nearly 90 lives, and another in a Portland living room where his family waited and worried, finally understanding the weight their son and brother carried every time he stepped into his role as a leader.
The man they had once considered ordinary was once again proving that extraordinary leadership often looks like quiet determination, ethical clarity, and the absolute refusal to accept that some people are expendable. And somewhere in the back of his mind, as Marcus worked through the complex tactical and diplomatic challenges of the Geneva crisis, he carried the strength that had sustained him through 8 years of classified service, the knowledge that his family loved him, supported him, and shared the values that made his work possible. 4 hours into the Geneva crisis, the Situation Room had become a pressure cooker of international tension. Representatives from 17 nations watched tactical displays showing 3 separate hostage locations, while Marcus coordinated what was rapidly becoming the most complex rescue operation in modern diplomatic history. Colonel Chen, reported intelligence analyst Captain Rodriguez, his voice tight with stress, "We've identified the terrorist leader, Dmitry Volkov, former military officer with expertise in psychological warfare. He's demanding not just prisoner releases, but public statements from each represented nation, acknowledging what he calls crimes against his homeland." Marcus studied the psychological profile that appeared on his screen. Volkov was no ordinary terrorist. He was a tactician who understood that his real weapon wasn't violence, but the political chaos that would result from forcing democratic nations to negotiate with terrorists on live television. "Sir," interrupted Major Chen from the tactical team, "no relation, despite the shared surname. Swiss authorities are getting pressure from multiple governments to authorize the assault. They're saying that every minute we delay increases the risk to their citizens." Admiral Torres leaned forward from her position at the command table. "Marcus, I need you to understand the political reality here. If this drags on much longer, some of these governments are going to demand immediate action, regardless of casualty." Marcus felt the weight of 87 lives pressing down on him, but also the weight of something larger, the principle that had guided every operation of his career. He thought of Anna Petrov now studying international relations, because someone had refused to write off her life as acceptable collateral damage. "Admiral, I need 30 more minutes. My team has developed an approach that could work, but it requires precise timing and coordination between multiple agencies." "Marcus," Admiral Torres said quietly, "in 30 minutes, we might not have a choice anymore. The political pressure." "Then I need you to buy me that time," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him legendary in special operations circles. "Tell the governments that we have a viable plan that will save everyone. Tell them that's worth 30 minutes. Meanwhile, in Portland, the Chen family was watching the crisis unfold on international news. The coverage had intensified, with reporters now confirming the scope of the hostage situation and the high-profile nature of the victim. The hostages include the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner in history, the BBC correspondent reported, as well as children from the International Youth Peace Ambassador Program. Sources indicate that American military advisors are coordinating the international response. Patricia Chen gripped her husband's hand. After 18 months of understanding Marcus's true role, she had learned to read between the lines of these news reports. American military advisors meant coordinating the international response meant he was the one making life or death decisions for nearly 90 people. Kyle stood up abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. "I can't handle this." Knowing that Uncle Marcus is in there, probably working 18-hour days, carrying all that responsibility, "Kyle," Dr. Chen said gently, "this is what your uncle has been doing for 8 years, we just didn't know it. Every time he came home looking tired, every time he was vague about work stress, he was carrying this kind of weight." Sarah's secure phone rang again. After a brief, tense conversation, she turned to her family with a grave expression. "I just spoke with someone at the Pentagon. The situation is more complex than the news is reporting. There are political dimensions that could affect international relations for decades." Uncle Robert, who had spent the evening pacing between the living room and kitchen,
finally voiced what everyone was thinking. How does one person handle that kind of pressure? How do you make decisions when the wrong choice could start a war? Back in Geneva, Marcus was facing exactly that reality. The tactical team had presented him with 3 different scenarios, each with its own risks and potential casualties. Option 1, reported Captain Sarah Mitchell, simultaneous assault on all 3 locations, high probability of success, but estimated casualties between 12 and 20 hostages. Option 2, continued Major Rodriguez, negotiate prisoner release and political statements as demanded. 0 immediate casualties, but establishes precedent for future terrorist demands on democratic governments. Option 3, Marcus said, studying the final proposal, is the one we're going to execute. The room fell silent as Marcus moved to the central display, where a complex diagram showed the interconnected nature of the 3 hostage locations. His team had discovered that the buildings were connected by underground service tunnels that the terrorist had overlooked. We're going to coordinate a rescue that appears to be a negotiated surrender, Marcus explained, his voice steady despite the enormity of what he was proposing. Teams will enter through the service tunnels while I personally engage Volkov in negotiation. When our people are in position, we execute simultaneous extractions at all 3 locations. Admiral Torres studied the plan with growing amazement. Marcus, this requires split-second timing across 3 separate tactical teams, diplomatic cover from multiple governments, and you personally putting yourself at risk as the negotiator. Yes, ma'am, but it brings everyone home alive. Captain Mitchell raised a concern that had been nagging at the entire team. Sir, if the timing is off by even 30 seconds, if one team is discovered early, Volkov could order the execution of all hostages before we can complete the extraction. Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of that risk. Captain, I've spent 8 years learning that the biggest risk is not the operation that might fail, it's living with the consequences of not trying to save everyone when you had the chance. He turned to address the entire Situation Room, representatives from 17 nations, all looking to him for leadership in the most complex crisis any of them had ever faced. I know this plan asks a lot of everyone involved. It requires trust between agencies that don't always cooperate, coordination between tactical teams that have never worked together, and diplomatic finesse from governments that are under enormous public pressure to act decisively. Marcus paused, thinking of his family gathered around their dinner table, trusting that the values they had instilled in him would guide his decisions even in moments like this. But I also know that in 6 months, or 6 years, when we look back on this day, the question won't be whether we acted quickly or decisively, the question will be whether we acted in a way that honored the value of every single life in those buildings. That's the standard I'm going to be held to by my own conscience, and it's the standard I believe we should all be held to. Admiral Torres looked around the room at the assembled representatives, seeing nods of agreement from military leaders, who had built their careers on much more conventional approaches to crisis resolution. Colonel Chen, she said formally, you have authorization to execute option 3. All participating agencies will coordinate through your command. As teams began moving into position for what would either be Marcus's greatest success or most devastating failure, his phone buzzed with a personal message from Sarah. The whole family is thinking of you. Bring everyone home, Marcus. We know you will. Marcus smiled slightly as he prepared to make the call that would either begin the most complex rescue operation in modern history, or trigger an international catastrophe. Either way, he would face it with the same quiet strength that had sustained him through 8 years of carrying burdens that most people couldn't imagine. The man his family had once considered ordinary was about to attempt something extraordinary, not because he sought glory or recognition, but because his conscience simply wouldn't allow him to accept that some people were expendable. In 90 minutes, the world would know whether that principle could survive contact with the harsh realities of international terrorism. But Marcus had already decided that regardless of the outcome, he would rather fail while trying to save everyone than succeed while sacrificing anyone.
At exactly 2:47 a.m. Geneva time, Colonel Marcus Chen walked alone into the main summit building, where Dmitry Volkov held 43 hostages, including the Nobel Peace Prize winner and 8 children from the Youth Ambassador program. The weight of 87 lives pressed down on him as he approached the doors, knowing that 3 tactical teams were simultaneously moving through underground tunnels toward the other hostage locations. Mr. Volkov, Marcus spoke into the secure communication device that would broadcast his voice throughout the building. This is Colonel Chen, United States Army. I'm here to discuss your term. The response came back immediately, Volkov's voice carrying the confidence of someone who believed he held all the cards. Colonel, I was expecting a diplomat. They send a soldier to negotiate with me. They sent someone who understands what it means to make hard choices under pressure. Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the knowledge that any mistake in the next 20 minutes could result in the largest diplomatic massacre in modern history. In the secure tunnel beneath the media center, Captain Sarah Mitchell led her team through the narrow passage, checking her watch every few seconds. The timing had to be perfect. Marcus needed exactly 18 minutes to position Volkov for the final phase of the operation. Meanwhile, in Portland, the Chen family had abandoned any pretense of normal Sunday evening activities. They sat transfixed by the international news coverage, which had now switched to live reporting from Geneva with continuous updates on the crisis. This is remarkable, the CNN correspondent reported. Sources indicate that rather than authorizing immediate military action, 17 different governments have agreed to coordinate through a single American military advisor. The level of international cooperation is unprecedented. Patricia Chen found herself praying for the first time in years, not just for her son's safety, but for the 87 strangers whose lives depended on decisions Marcus was making in real time. She finally understood what Marcus had meant when he said that their love had given him strength. Knowing that his family supported him allowed him to carry burdens that would crush most people. Back in Geneva, Marcus had begun the most delicate psychological chess match of his career. Through security cameras, he could see Volkov, a tall, lean man with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, wearing a suicide vest that made any direct assault impossible. Colonel, Volkov said, his English accented but precise, you Americans always think you can solve everything with superior technology and coordination. But I have something you cannot overcome, the willingness to die for my cause. Mr. Volkov, Marcus replied, slowly entering the main conference room where hostages sat in carefully arranged groups. I respect that conviction. I've served with soldiers who had that same willingness to sacrifice for something greater than themselves. The question is whether your cause requires the death of innocents to succeed. Marcus could see the children in his peripheral vision, 8 young people between the ages of 12 and 16 who had come to Geneva to participate in peace education program. Among them he recognized Anna Petrov's younger cousin, Mikhail, a detail that made the operation intensely personal. These are not innocents, Colonel. They are representatives of governments that have oppressed my people, symbols of a world order that ignores suffering when it's convenient. Through his earpiece, Marcus heard Captain Mitchell's whispered report, Tunnel Team 2 in position, Tunnel Team 3 moving to final approach. Estimate 4 minutes to simultaneous brief. Marcus needed to keep Volkov talking, but more importantly, he needed to gradually move him away from the detonator that could kill everyone in the room. The psychological profile had indicated that Volkov was driven by a need for recognition, for having his grievances heard on a world stage. Mr. Volkov, I've read about the situation in your homeland, the displacement of your people, the economic devastation, the international community's failure to respond adequately. You're right that these injustices have been ignored. For the first time, Volkov paused, slightly surprised that an American military officer had taken the time to understand his political grievances. You speak as if you understand, Colonel, but you represent the very system that has ignored our suffering. I represent a country that makes mistakes, Mr. Volkov, but I also represent the possibility that those mistakes can be acknowledged and addressed. The question is whether that happens through dialogue or through tragedy. In Portland, Kyle was staring at the television with a new understanding of what military leadership actually meant. Dad, he said quietly, Uncle Marcus isn't just trying to save those hostages, he's trying to save the terrorist too, isn't he? Dr. Chen nodded slowly. Your uncle has never accepted that anyone has to die if there's another way, even when that person is threatening others. Sarah's secure phone rang again. After a brief conversation, She looked at her family with a mixture of pride and terror. Marcus has positioned himself as the primary negotiator. He's in the same room with the terrorist leader and 43 hostages. If this goes wrong, it won't, Uncle Robert said with surprising firmness. Your brother has spent 8 years learning how to handle impossible situations. He's exactly where he needs to be. Back in Geneva, Marcus had gradually moved closer to Volkov while continuing their conversation about political grievances and international justice. The terrorist leader was now standing near the large conference window, his back partially turned to the door that Team 1 would use for their entry. 3 minutes to breach, came the whisper in Marcus's earpiece. Volkov, Marcus said, pulling out his secure phone. I want to show you something. The families of these hostages have been sending messages, not political statements or government positions, but personal messages from people who are terrified of losing someone they love. Marcus began reading actual messages that had been sent by hostages' families, messages that his team had collected and verified in real time. As he read about parents worried about their children, spouses praying for their partner's safety, children asking when their moms and dads would come home, he saw something shift in Volkov's expression. These are the real consequences of your actions, Mr. Volkov. Not political changes or diplomatic victories, but human suffering that will echo through generations. 2 minutes to breach. Marcus took a calculated risk, stepping closer to Volkov while continuing to read the family messages. I know you've lost people you loved to violence and injustice. I know you understand what it means to have someone ripped away from you. But forcing others to experience that same loss won't bring your people back. Volkov's hand had moved away from the detonator as he listened to the messages. For a moment, Marcus saw not a terrorist but a man broken by loss and driven to desperate actions by the failure of peaceful alternatives. 30 seconds to breach. Mr. Volkov, Marcus said, his voice carrying genuine compassion. There's still time to end this without more tragedy. These hostages don't have to die for your message to be heard. In that moment, as tactical teams prepared to breach 3 separate buildings simultaneously, as 87 lives hung in the balance, as 17 governments waited for the outcome that would shape international crisis response for generations, Marcus embodied everything his family had tried to teach him about the value of human life and the possibility of redemption. The next 30 seconds would determine whether those values could survive contact with the harsh realities of international terrorism, or whether the man his family had once called ordinary would prove capable of something truly extraordinary. Breach, in 10 seconds, whispered the voice in his earpiece. All teams ready. Marcus looked directly into Volkov's eyes, seeing a man who had lost everything and was about to lose more. Mr. Volkov, he said quietly, there's another way. And then everything happened at once. At exactly 2:47 a.m. and 30 seconds, Geneva time, 3 tactical teams breached their respective buildings simultaneously, while Marcus made his final appeal to Dmitry Volkov's humanity. The coordinated operation unfolded with the precision of a Swiss watch, but in the main conference room, time seemed to slow as Volkov's hand moved toward the detonator. Mr. Volkov, Marcus said, stepping forward with deliberate calm, I want you to know that I understand your pain. I've lost people too, but this moment, right now, is when you choose whether their deaths create more suffering or whether their memory inspires something better. Volkov's eyes met Marcus's, and in that instant, the terrorist leader saw something he hadn't expected. Genuine compassion from someone who could have easily authorized his death. The detonator trembled in his hand as Team 1 burst through the doors behind him. Stand down. Marcus commanded his own team, his voice carrying absolute authority. Mr. Volkov and I are still talking. The tactical team froze, weapons trained but not firing, as Marcus continued his approach. Around the room, 43 hostages held their breath, understanding that their lives hung in the balance of this impossible moment. Colonel, Volkov said, his voice cracking with emotion, you should have killed me, that would have been easier for everyone. Mr. Volkov, Marcus replied, now close enough to see tears in the man's eyes. Easier isn't always right. You have a choice to make. You can end this as a terrorist who killed innocent people, or you can end it as someone who chose mercy when revenge was possible. In Portland, the Chen family was watching international news coverage that had shifted to breaking news banners across every channel. The reports were confused and contradictory, but one thing was clear: something significant was happening in Geneva. We're getting reports of coordinated tactical operations at all 3 hostage locations, the BBC correspondent announced, but details remain unclear. What we can confirm is that this represents the largest international hostage rescue coordination in modern history. Patricia Chen gripped her husband's hand so tightly that her knuckles went white. "Please," she whispered, not sure if she was praying for her son's safety or for the strangers whose lives depended on his decisions. Back in Geneva, the moment of truth had arrived. Volkov looked around the room at the children he had been prepared to kill, at the diplomats whose only crime was believing in the possibility of peace, at the journalist who had come to report on hope rather than tragedy. "They never listen," Volkov said quietly, his hand still on the detonator. "The powerful never listen until violence forces them to pay attention. Then make them listen differently," Marcus replied. "You have the attention of 17 governments right now. You have the world watching. What message do you want to send? That suffering can only be answered with more suffering, or that even in the darkest moments, people can choose a better path." Marcus could hear the updates from the other locations through his earpiece. Media center secure. All hostages safe. Diplomatic residence secured. 0 casualties. But the success of those operations meant nothing if this final standoff ended in tragedy. "Mr. Volkov," Marcus said, extending his hand, "give me the detonator. Let me help you tell your story to the world in a way that honors your people's suffering without creating more." For a moment that felt like an eternity, Volkov stared at Marcus's outstretched hand. Around them, tactical team members maintained their positions. Hostages remained frozen in terror, and the fate of international crisis resolution hung in the balance. Then, slowly, Dmitry Volkov placed the detonator in Marcus's hand. The relief. At the family dinner, "They called me useless. Then my sister's commander said, 'You're my superior officer.' 6 months after Geneva, Colonel Marcus Chen stood before a joint session of Congress, about to deliver testimony that would change how the world understood military service, family values, and the true meaning of heroism. But the most profound moment wouldn't happen in the halls of power. It would happen 3 hours later, at a simple family dinner in Portland, Oregon. "Honorable members of Congress," Marcus began, his voice carrying the same quiet authority that had saved 87 lives in Geneva. "I stand before you not as a hero, but as the product of a family that taught me values I never fully understood until I was forced to live them under the most extreme circumstances." In the gallery above, the entire Chen family sat together, finally present to witness Marcus receive the recognition that had been classified for so many years. But what would happen next would leave them, and everyone watching, speechless. The operation in Geneva succeeded not because of military tactics or international coordination, Marcus continued, but because of a simple principle my family taught me when I was 12 years old. He paused, looking directly at his family in the gallery. "My nephew Kyle once built a birdhouse for a school project. When he finished, he realized he'd made the entrance hole too small for the birds he wanted to help. Most people would have called it good enough, but my mother, his grandmother, sat with him for 3 hours helping him carefully enlarge that hole so every bird could find shelter." Patricia Chen's eyes filled with tears as she remembered that long-forgotten afternoon. She taught him that day, and all of us watching, that when you're building something meant to protect others, good enough isn't good enough if it means some are left out. That principle, learned at a kitchen table in Portland, guided every decision I made in Geneva. Marcus turned to address the full chamber. "The Chen Protocol that saved 87 lives in Geneva, that has since been adopted by NATO and used to prevent civilian casualties in 12 different operations, that is now taught in military academies worldwide. That protocol didn't come from military texts. It came from watching my father spend his weekends tutoring struggling students for free because he believed every mind deserved a chance to learn." Dr. Chen sat stunned,
never realizing that his simple acts of kindness had shaped international military doctrine. It came from watching my Uncle Robert hire veterans for his construction projects, not because it was profitable, but because he believed everyone deserved dignity through meaningful work. Uncle Robert, the man who had once lectured Marcus about building something meaningful, was now crying openly. It came from watching my sister Sarah coordinate supply chains with meticulous care because she understood that every delayed delivery might mean a soldier going without needed equipment. Sarah gripped Kyle's hand, understanding for the first time how her own military service had influenced her brother's approach to saving lives. And it came from watching my cousin Jennifer fight legal battles pro bono because she believed justice shouldn't depend on someone's ability to pay for it. But Marcus wasn't finished. The most powerful revelation was yet to come. Members of Congress, I need to tell you something that will challenge everything you think you know about heroism and service. The operation in Geneva wasn't the most important thing I've ever done. The most important thing I've ever done was learning to carry the weight of others' expectations with grace, even when those expectations hurt. The chamber fell completely silent. For 8 years, my family believed I was a failure. They worried about my career prospects, questioned my life choices, and compared me unfavorably to other family members. They had no idea I was serving in classified operations, preventing international conflicts, or briefing presidents. Marcus's voice grew stronger, more passionate. But here's what I learned during those 8 years of being misunderstood. Their love for me, even wrapped in disappointment, gave me strength I never could have found anywhere else. Their worry about my future made me determined to protect futures they couldn't imagine. Their belief that I could do better pushed me to save lives in ways they never dreamed possible. He looked directly at his family again. My family didn't know they were raising a soldier. They thought they were raising a son, a brother, a nephew who needed guidance and support. But in giving me that guidance and support, even when it stung, they were actually training me to carry the weight of impossible decisions with love instead of anger, with compassion instead of bitterness. The congressman who had invited Marcus to testify was visibly moved. Colonel Chen, are you saying that being misunderstood by your family actually made you a better soldier? Sir, I'm saying that being loved by my family, even when they didn't understand me, made me a better human being. And better human beings make better soldiers, better leaders, and better protectors of the innocent. Marcus paused, gathering himself for his final point. The man who convinced Dmitry Volkov to surrender that detonator wasn't the decorated special operations officer with years of classified training. It was the grandson who learned from his grandmother that you never give up on someone who's lost. It was the son who learned from his father that understanding someone's pain doesn't excuse their actions, but it might inspire their redemption. It was the nephew who learned from his uncle that building something worthwhile requires patience, sacrifice, and the belief that everyone deserves shelter. The chamber erupted in sustained applause, but Marcus raised his hand for silence. He had one more thing to say. I want to end with this. My family spent years believing they had raised someone ordinary. What they actually did was raise someone who understood that the most extraordinary thing you can do is treat every human life as if it has infinite value, even when that human life belongs to someone who threatens others. Marcus looked directly at Kyle, now a midshipman preparing for his own military career. The values my family taught me around our dinner table in Portland, kindness, persistence, the belief that everyone deserves a second chance, the conviction that love is stronger than fear, those values prevented a war in Geneva. They saved 87 lives. They convinced a terrorist to choose mercy over revenge. And they will continue to save lives every time someone chooses compassion over convenience, understanding over judgment, hope over despair. As Marcus concluded his testimony, something unprecedented happened. The entire chamber, Republicans and Democrats, military leaders and civilian officials, gallery observers and press corps, rose in complete sustained silence. Not applause, but the kind of profound quiet that comes when people encounter a truth so powerful it leaves them speechless. 3 hours later, the Chen family sat around their familiar dinner table in Portland, but this time, everything was different. This time they understood that the values they had always shared weren't just family principles. They were world-changing forces that had shaped international policy and saved countless lives.
Marcus,
Patricia said quietly, I spent so many years worrying that we hadn't taught you enough about ambition, about reaching for success. Mom, Marcus interrupted gently, you taught me something better than ambition. You taught me that love means never giving up on someone, even when you don't understand them. That's the lesson that saved 87 lives in Geneva. Kyle, now preparing for his own military career, looked at his uncle with new eyes. Uncle Marcus, I understand now. The reason you could do what you did isn't because you're special, it's because you're exactly who this family raised you to be. Dr. Chen shook his head in amazement. All these years we thought we were teaching you to be successful. We never realized we were teaching you to be heroic.
Dad,
Marcus said with a smile, you taught me that heroism isn't about being recognized or celebrated. It's about doing what's right when no one's watching, caring for people who can't help you in return, and believing that everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment.
Uncle Robert,
who had traveled far from his days of measuring success in profit margins, raised his glass. To the Chen family values, apparently they're strong enough to prevent wars. As laughter filled the room, Marcus realized that his journey had come full circle. The family who had once questioned his potential now understood that they had always possessed something more valuable than conventional success. They had possessed the moral courage to love unconditionally, to believe in second chances, and to treat every person as infinitely precious. And in teaching those values to a quiet boy who would grow up to be a soldier, they had changed the world in ways they never could have imagined. The story that began with a family calling their son useless, ended with that same family understanding that their ordinary values were extraordinary forces for good in a world that desperately needed them. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never seek recognition, never demand applause, and never stop believing that love is stronger than fear. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning a war, it's preventing one by treating your enemies like lost family members who just need someone to show them the way home. Marcus Chen learned that lesson at a dinner table in Portland, Oregon, and because he learned it there, 87 strangers lived to share dinners with their own families. That's the power of ordinary people living extraordinary values. That's the quiet strength that changes the world one life, one choice, one moment of compassion at a time. And that's long after the medals have been stored away and the ceremonies forgotten. The most important battles are still fought and won around family dinner tables, where children learn that every person matters, that love never gives up, and that the greatest heroes are often the ones whose names you'll never know. The Chen family had raised a hero. They just never realized that in doing so, they had become heroes themselves.
You've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.